Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a review that I'm sure on some level, no matter how much I prepare and listen, I will truly never be ready for. Godspeed You, Black Emperor. Allelujah. Don't bend, ascend. Godspeed is a Canadian post-rock outfit also delving into the sounds of experimental rock, ambient music, drone, noise. And this is their latest LP, their fourth full-length album that you can get a hold of. And it's their first LP in about 10 freaking years. The band took a hiatus in the early 2000s shortly after the release of their album Yankee UXO. However, in 2010 the group got back together with a mostly original lineup and started touring again. Really with no warning whatsoever, so it would be pretty fitting that also with no warning whatsoever, in the midst of getting back together and touring, they've been assembling this new album right under our noses and selling it to fans inconspicuously at some recent live shows. And why? Why the mystery? You know, Godspeed has just kind of continued to be a band that takes great pride in the fact that it has always, in at least some way, worked outside traditional music industry standards. It kind of goes without saying that this album has a lot to live up to, with the exception of maybe Yankee UXO, which I know got some mixed reviews upon its release. Nearly every project Godspeed has ever put out has been very beloved, influential, and genre-defining. And there is, of course, the 10-year gap factor on this album. But if any band is naturally equipped to make such a comeback, it is Godspeed. Larger-than-life music is kinda their thing. Long, winding, somewhat cumbersome at times, songs that are equal parts joyously noisy and melodic. With Don't Bend Ascend at its very start, I wasn't incredibly impressed. For me, it was kind of an inconspicuous beginning for a Godspeed LP. There was no touching or depressingly dismal melody. This track didn't even really start off with a gripping vocal sample, and it kind of began with a drone that I think would breeze by most ears if Godspeed's name wasn't tagged onto it. However, what this track evolves into over the course of its 20-minute runtime is spectacular. The drone thickens with guitar distortion, and all of a sudden, just flying over the drone, there are just like these plucked string sounds. Maybe it's a guitar, but they're just so sharp and sour and metallic. It's like metallic birds flying overhead in a flock, migrating away from the impending storm. It's just really gripping, and it shows that Godspeed has not lost its touch when it comes to creating a very cinematic soundscape. The drone starts building up into something else, snares arise out of the fog of noise, some downstroked guitar chords kind of reveal themselves, and tension just starts growing. Guitar leads eventually develop and give way to loads of other sounds, heavier drones, wails, squeals, feedback and strings. I mean, Godspeed creates very masterfully a very menacing wall of sounds. The band heads full throttle into string sections and drum fills. The pace is really picking up, and the track eventually just becomes this hectic jam with a Middle Eastern melody and groove. The band is just seamlessly flowing through different levels of intensity as the track continues. Every once in a while a new melody gets incorporated, and the last 5 minutes of this thing are especially heavy and awesome, with another melody change along with some strings and just some heavy drumming. I mean, I know this tag does not necessarily get thrown onto Godspeed, but I mean, this to me is just like an ideal combination of just orchestral subtlety and beauty combined with just a rock sensibility. And just the Middle Eastern flavor of this track, it's so fitting to kick off the start of this LP, considering it's one of the more war-torn parts of the world right now. And it's kind of weird thinking that this track, because of its flavor, is just as relevant as it would have been had it been released around 2003 when it was originally conceived. It's no secret at this point in the promotion of this album that a lot of the material that is on this record, Godspeed's been kind of sitting on it for a while. It's just that the performances of these pieces that you're hearing on this record are new. But still, Godspeed's aesthetic remains very potent. They just continue to be a sonic revolution against political and social injustice. And what's crazy is that they've been able to maintain this very socially aware image while not having lyrics or a vocalist. And still, maybe even without all the very kind of elaborate packaging that typically comes with Godspeed albums, the message is incredibly clear in this music. In the same way rotting fruit brings fruit flies, people who feel disenfranchised or other people who sympathize with those people are going to create art that reflects that. And between the soaring melodies and the noise and the intensity and just the thickness and the ambition, there are very obvious elements of dissatisfaction in Godspeed's music, of idealism, both hope and loss. What else could the band be soundtracking? Maybe I'm thinking about it too much. Now, after the opener on this LP, you get 3 more tracks from Godspeed. The third track, is one more 20-minute epic, and kind of separating the first and third track is a 6-minute drone, and ending the album off is another drone/ambient piece. Now, the first of the 2 drones kind of separates the 2 monster tracks on here. Maybe it's a bit of a dip down from the first track, kind of letting things cool off before we jump back into the third song for another 20-minute ride. I guess in that respect it does add to the flow of the album, but I didn't really catch any logical melodic connections or thematic connections between these 3 tracks, listening to them one after the other. It just kind of felt like a bit of a bookmark. Oh, you're over. Let's wait, intermission, bam. Still, that doesn't change that what Godspeed does on this track, Their Helicopters Sing, is very nice and, again, masterful. The way that they just intertwine all these droning and just kind of screaming and wailing elements into something that is so intense. The band, without a beat, without a clear melody or just a pace, a momentum, is able to just make things so, with loads of dissonant strings kind of piling on one another as the track progresses. A synth melody kind of introduces itself toward the end of the track too. There are just a lot of things to pick up in this track, considering it's just a wall of sound. Godspeed just brings a lot of detail and just, it's all swimming freely throughout this ocean that they're conjuring with their instruments, and you yourself are kind of free to explore it at your desire. Now, the second of these 2 ambient pieces, Strung Like Lights, I actually liked a bit more. It did have a bit more progression to it than the second track. The track just has this really tattered, muddy, and just desolate beginning, and it eventually climaxes very nicely. The track is really subtle in its build. Of course, the climax is chaotic, and the eerie synth sounds that are kind of left behind after all the instrumentation disappears, very eerie. However, I still can't help but feel like this is a bit of an anticlimactic closer, I guess. Kind of cut and dry, compartmentalized. To continue, We Drift Like Worried Fire, the third track on here, I mean, just as great as the first. And the song kind of works in 2 movements, both of which have very interesting progressions to them, though they are a bit similar. The first movement has this very dreary, plucked violin melody with these weeping guitars. The sounds that they're making are almost something that would perfectly soundtrack a sci-fi film from like the 50s or the 60s. However, when this violin melody, all the guitar sounds fade away, the melody ends up being repeated by a guitar, and still dreary, continues, and as strings and more instrumentation surround this melody, it actually ends up sounding uplifting, not dark or depressing at all. And I love that Godspeed, with their instrumentation, can just take the same exact melody and just mood change the entire track just like that, with one instrumental phrase or idea leapfrogging over another until the song gets louder and louder and heavier and just more intense. The track eventually climaxes, and right after there's this lone, beautiful, gorgeous violin melody, just so rough. It's like the sound of crying, but like tears of joy. Now, the second movement of this track starts off dreary like the first, but ends up sounding kind of positive and inspiring once again, but in a different way. I mean, once the brighter half of this movement comes along, the track really picks up speed, picks up pace. They're just hammering on these harmonious chords. The tension, again, is there, but it's kind of a tension that puts a smile on my face. And the fact that they're able to jam out these two musical parts that have, distinctions but also parallels in 20 minutes is just so impressive. Still, I can't really shake the idea that this LP is a collection of tracks that the band kind of assembled in the best way that they could. And even though I don't think the parts when put together in this track listing really make chemistry, really make an explosion, I do think each part, separately at least, is extremely impressive and creates a record that goes over much better than most comeback albums. Not that justifies anything, it doesn't. But still, when it comes to longtime Godspeed fans and even newcomers too, the band presents the intensity, grit, beauty, melodic sensibilities, and high-level ambitions that have always made the band great. Hopefully, soon we'll see the band again back in the studio, hammering out an album that is brand new from front to back, but in the meantime, this is a great and very enjoyable listen. One that I was pretty satisfied with. I wish there was more material on it, but still. I'm feeling a strong 8 to a light 9 on this album. What did you think of it if you've given it a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Why? And what should I have a headache. Review next. Anthony Fantano, Godspeed, forever.